Welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Stories of Determination. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani Fossbender. Like in nature, we see determined flowers and vines clinging to life and seeking light. So are Morning Glory people. And in this podcast, I'll interview writers, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, survivors and thrivers, and trailblazers of all kinds. These are folks that have been determined to get over, under, around, and through the obstacles that face them, or to seize the opportunities that come before them. I find these people inspiring and amazing. I know you will too. Today on the Morning Glory Project, I'm happy to make a new acquaintance and hopefully a new friend in Matt Nightingale. Matt is an educator, musician, speaker, writer, and spiritual director living and working in San Francisco's North Bay. He is the pastor, along with his longtime best friend, Tony Gapastone, of The Quest, a progressive American Baptist church in Novato, California. As a gay Christian, Matt is passionate about the intersection of sexuality and spirituality. He works to create safe, sacred spaces for people exploring these identities. His TEDx talk, Choosing Gratitude and Hope, with his former wife, Luanne Nightingale, tells the story of their 23-year mixed orientation marriage and evolving understanding of faith and sexuality and the choice to end their marriage with gratitude and hope. When he first acknowledged his authentic sexuality, Matt believed he needed to be cured and tried to do this in the confines of the church where he then worked. Eventually, he grew to accept his sexuality, though it cost him his marriage and the job he held in his church. Matt is now a spiritual director and support group facilitator with The Christian Closet, which offers web-based counseling, coaching, and spiritual direction for LGBTQ Christians. Matt's musical creative exploits have included performing a solo show at the Tulsa Jazz Hall of Fame, singing the national anthem at two 49ers games, and a stint with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. His song Always Entertain Me was featured in the hit Korean drama Iris, and his song Going Home was recorded by Broadway star and Emmy winner Loretta Devine and is featured on the soundtrack of the short film Neighbor. Matt is also the proud father of Joshua, age 24, Jacob, 21, Emily and Zachary, age 18. Matt, welcome to the Morning Glory Project. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, yours is quite a story, and I really encourage folks to watch the TEDx talk that you do with your for your former wife. It's so moving to see the two of you addressing the parallel experiences of what you went through. Can you perhaps relay a bit of that experience for listeners here who perhaps haven't heard that talk about how you and Emily came to do that particular piece?
Yeah, it was quite a story. We had just kind of announced to our church, our faith community, that I was coming out to live authentically as a gay man, and that would mean the end of our marriage. And I was, in that same announcement, letting people know that I was resigning from my position as a music minister in our church and resigning my credentials in our denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church. And it was just about, I think, just 2 weeks after that momentous day, I was kind of venturing forth into gay land, which was a new thing for me. And I went to a mixer, an LGBTQ mixer, at a coffee shop and pub called Brew up here in Santa Rosa. And I had just seen it online, and I thought, well, I might as well go and see if I can meet some people. So I walked in, and I jokingly say that I had no idea how to talk to gay men, so I just hung out with the lesbians all night in the corner. And I actually had a really nice talk with one couple in particular. And I was also something of an open wound at the time. I was just like telling, if people asked me a question, I would answer it honestly. Oh, so how are you? I'm okay. So have you lived here long? Yeah. tell me a little bit about your life. And I'd say like, well, I just came out of the closet 2 weeks ago and I still live at home with my wife and my children. Jaws would just drop on the floor. Like, what? And I remember having a conversation with one couple and they said, you're still living with your wife? I said, yeah. And the two of you are friendly with each other? I said, yeah, it's a pretty remarkable story. And she said, well, interestingly, we're on the board of Sonoma County TEDx talks, and this sounds like a really good story. And so that very night, I went home and talked to Luanne, and we decided that if this could be helpful for people, we would do it. And so, just a couple of months later, we were standing on the stage sharing this story. And to date, it's been seen, I think, over 26,000 times now on YouTube. So I'm grateful for the impact that it's been able to have.
Now, you say after that momentous day, and you say it with a laugh, but when I hear underneath your laugh, that day of announcing to everybody, you kind of lost everything. You were not unhappily married in terms of you weren't hostile towards your wife. She wasn't hostile. You guys care about each other. You were best friends, if I understand the TED Talk well.
Yeah.
So you lost your marriage, your home, your financial security, your job, your church community, or at least your formal arrangement with them.
Yeah.
That must have been, momentous is the word you use, and that's a beautifully heady word, but it sounds like a gut bust of a day.
It really was. I think, looking back at it, we didn't know exactly what it would be like when it finally happened, but I had the interesting experience of going through that coming out with my wife and with my children as supporters.
First.
Yeah. And so there was even, in the months leading up to my public coming out and my resignation from my church, we knew about this. We knew that it was coming. We didn't know exactly how or when, but my children, my wife, and I kind of had this big secret, and we were doing as best we could to support each other in those months leading up to that coming out, that public coming out. So yes, it was a huge thing when it finally was public, and when everyone found out. There was an email that went out to the entire membership of our church, over 1,000 people. We put it on social media, and I did have a lot of support. So although it was incredibly painful and I did lose a lot, I also had a lot of support, which I think is really interesting, and I'm really grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me back up a little bit, because I'm guessing, I don't know, you'll have to tell me if I'm guessing this right. I'm guessing that you knew the sexual feelings that you had, but that you were a person of faith and tried to tuck those away for a long time. So you did what you thought you should do, which is you married a woman that you loved and cared for and formed a family and all of that. And you were married for how long?
We were married 23 years.
Right. So this wasn't like you were married 6 months and then said, whoops, I forgot to tell you. This was something that, what was that wrestling match inside of you going on during that time? That must have been so difficult to be at odds with your own self.
Yeah. Yeah. This is something that a lot of LGBTQ people who grow up in conservative Christian families experience. And I knew when I was 10 years old that I was gay. In fact, I remember hearing something on the playground one day when I was 10. Somebody used the term homosexual, and in a derogatory kind of way. I went to a little Christian school in northern Indiana, and in that moment, I remember thinking, "Oh, that's what it is. Oh. That's who I am. That's what I am." And in a way, I think it was maybe helpful to have an understanding, but in another way, all that did for me as a little Christian kid growing up in northern Indiana in 1981 was, this is something I have to hide the rest of my life. And so, from that day on, I really did. I kept this, life-defining secret for decades. And
it sounds like you did more than have to hide it. It sounds like you had to, even to yourself, pretend it wasn't so, and or think that it was something that you could get out of, or quit, or stop, or
yeah,
suppress, or whatever. That it was a sin and that you shouldn't follow it. Is that how you were
yeah,
thinking at that
yeah,
time?
absolutely. I mean, in even to this day, in more conservative versions of Christianity, uh, acting on homosexual orientation is absolutely considered sinful, deviant, perverted. And that was my understanding in 1981 as a little kid. Any mention of a kind of an alternative sexuality was always in the context of this is sick and broken and wrong, and you just can't do it. So I say sometimes that I just had I had no positive vision of what LGBTQ people were like. I had no language really beyond a label for these things that I was experiencing, and I just knew I had to, A, hide it, and B, do whatever I could to kind of avoid living into that. And I was the kind of child who always wanted to do the right thing. I was a very devoutly a spiritual kid, and I loved children and family, and I had this dream and this idea that I was going to grow up to be a husband and a father, and so I just kind of tried. I made that happen, almost through force of will. I will be these things. This is what will please God. This is what will please my family. This is the quote unquote right thing to do. And so that I went about making that happen.
So at some point, here you are in this 23-year marriage with somebody whom you care for and admire, and who's the mother of your children, whom you adore. What was the dark moment, or what was the difficult thing, the moment that you said, I have to tell her the truth.
Mm.
I can't do this anymore. What spun that for you, or what changed it where something clicked? And my understanding from your TED Talk is that when you came out to your wife, it wasn't so much that you wanted to leave her and go out and be a gay man, or that you had other lovers on your mind or any of that, but that you thought you needed to tell her this truth so that the two of you could deal with this, right?
Yeah.
So how'd you get there?
It's such a long process, but my first coming out was in 2002, and we had been married for 8 years. By that point, we had 4 little children, and I was a full-time music minister in Redwood City, California. It was my first full-time ministry job. So I had so much going on, and I was, still deeply, devoutly Christian, and believed very much that this thing about myself was something that was outside of me, something that was a temptation, something that could and should be avoided. And around that time, I started reading in national media and in Christian publications, and that there was such a thing as reparative therapy, that some people were reporting that they could change gay to straight, and I thought, man, if that's real, if I can do that, I absolutely want that. I love this family. I love this wife. I love this ministry life of mine, and I want to do this. And so for me, the first coming out in 2002 was terrifying, but it was not coming out so that I could live an authentic life as a gay man. It was coming out so that I could get healed and fixed and free from this quote unquote temptation. That's how I looked at it back then. I didn't look at it as an identity or something that was kind of intrinsically a part of me. Back then, in my understanding of reality, it was an evil temptation. It was something that I could kind of keep at bay if I just focused on the right things and prayed hard enough and conditioned my mind and my body to not do or indulge in those behaviors,
Like anyone else might feel that they needed to pray for relief from other impulsive actions or sins or those kinds of things. You were thinking that there's, and sometimes it's called conversion therapy, and sometimes it's called praying the gay away.
Right.
I've heard it called that. So you were still trying to do that, and your wife was supportive, and
Yeah, it was even then. It was a big and scary thing to come out to her, to my pastor that I worked for at the time, to close ministry friends. I thought, gosh, I'm going to lose everything. But to their credit, all of them, they supported and loved and encouraged me. We all back then really did believe kind of the same thing, that this was something that was evil and broken. It wasn't necessarily my fault, but it was something that I could not indulge. It's something
And that
I
you
had
needed to overcome.
fight. Yes. And so, and they would say things like, well, everyone's got their challenges. Everyone's got their struggles, and there's truth in that. I just thought, well, this is mine, I guess, my cross to bear, my burden to bear. And that's kind of how I approached it back then. And I did all kinds of conversion therapy. We did lots of marriage counseling. I did lots of kind of talk therapy with marriage and family therapists. I even did a lot of 12-step work for sex addiction recovery, because at the time I thought of this as kind of like a compulsion, something like an addiction, something that I could over time surrender and let go of if I just, avoided these things.
What changed then between that kind of first coming out, where you still were trying to suppress this thing, and when you ultimately decided, no, this is what I am?
Yeah.
What changed?
It was a long, we stayed together for 15 years after the first coming out. And I look at it as just kind of a long process of realizations, one after another. The first realization was that this wasn't going to go away. It just wasn't. And this is back when I still believed it was a sinful behavior. But I thought, well, this isn't going to change. No one that I've talked to had even back then was really claiming to have had much real transformation in this area. It was more about learning to ignore it, or learning to go against your natural feeling. And so I think my first step was to realize this wouldn't change. And I thought, well, all right, at least I don't have to feel guilty for not experiencing this sexuality change. And then I think the second step for me was beginning to understand this was, for me, part of my identity, part of what makes me who I am, no less than the fact that I am male or white or right-handed or that I have hazel eyes. This was something about me that just was something about me. Many people are straight. I am not. And I started to use the term gay to describe myself, which was a really big change. If you know anything about conversion therapy or this idea, part of it is to never claim that as an identity. Always think of it as something outside yourself that you can keep at bay. Because once you start to say, wait a minute, I'm gay, this is just a part of who I am, it becomes much more difficult to think that it's somehow broken or wrong, Which
is really funny, because it's so often the opposite of that in say addiction recovery. It's like, no, you need to say I'm an alcoholic so that you can change it, Right. So in this case, it was sort of like, no, you don't want to take ownership of this thing, because it's not real. That's just a sin or a fantasy or something that we have to suppress. So It's just an interesting, there's a parallel with a little bit of a twist in there that's just a little different.
It's funny too, because while they don't want you to use the term gay to describe yourself, they do talk about same-sex attraction, and that they want you to claim and own. Yes, I struggle with same-sex attraction. That's kind of the language that they use.
Well, but that would be like, I struggle with temptation to gamble. I struggle with it could be this parallel to those kinds of things.
That's how it's thought about. Yeah, for sure.
So here's what I'm wondering too. So you participated in what I would call conversion therapy to try to work this out. And you had what lots of men in your same, or people, men and women in your same situation don't have. You had a lot of support and love during this, which is, I'm so glad that you had that. It's a luxury, of course, that not everyone has. And I'm glad that you did.
Right.
it sounds to me, if I'm hearing it right, Matt, that at some point it was just the inauthenticity of living, being a different person than you genuinely were
Yeah.
that caused the biggest rift. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty insightful of you. In fact, I do a lot of work with other men in similar situations, and for some people, it often is about relationships and the desire to be with a male partner. And I will admit that was absolutely something that I wanted, something that I felt like I kind of yearned for in a natural kind of way. But for me, I think that maybe the largest thing, the thing that actually finally propelled me out of the closet was absolutely what you're saying, this kind of feeling of inauthenticity. And I am an extrovert. I'm an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs. I am an Enneagram 7. My life is very much about expressing the reality of who I am. And I think it just over time became so unbearable to me to live every day like I was putting on a costume. That's what it felt like. Get up in the morning, put on the costume of the wife and the children and the ministry life and the straight thing. And it just didn't fit anymore. And the more and more I realized that this, in fact, was not something outside myself, was not something broken at all, but was just something about me that actually could be claimed, that actually could be celebrated. Over time, it became really, really difficult to think, well, that is true, and yet I can never experience that, and I can never be truthful. I remember the day after the news broke in our world, waking up on a Saturday morning in the bedroom I was living in at the time, and in that first moment of consciousness, you're just kind of sleepy, whatever, and then it hits you. Oh, that happened. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm actually out of the closet, and I never again have to do anything except to tell the truth. That's it. I never ever have to worry about who knows what, how much they know, this is just, now I get to just live my life and tell the truth. And that felt so good.
I imagine that's just so freeing. I know there's an expression that's shared in 12-step rooms a lot, which is you're only as sick as your secrets.
Right. Yes.
The secrecy of it, the hiding it first from yourself, perhaps even from your God, certainly from your community, from your family, that had to be so difficult. So you stepped out of the closet and it changed everything. But it wasn't. I'm going to ask you a question that's absolutely none of my business, Matt. And if you
Okay.
want to answer, you don't have to. But it sounds to me as though even during this coming out process, you were remaining, not acting upon these searches with men, that you were honoring your marriage in that way. You were honoring your commitment in your faith and all of that. So it wasn't like you were sneaking out and going to bars and la la la.
Yeah.
It was just something that you knew about yourself. Is that right?
Yeah. I had one early sexual experience decades before, and that was actually something that I was ashamed of because it had been a one-time thing shortly after I got married. So there was at least some evidence, lived experience that yes, this did feel
that validated.
Yes, that made me realize this. But from that moment on, way back in 1993, I guess, I had never ever strayed outside our marriage, and that was really important to me, even throughout the whole coming out process. And there came a point where we finally, Luanne and I both said, yeah, you are free now to date and to whatever, figure this out. But it wasn't until after that.
So a lot of people really struggle. A lot of people of, like as you say it, conservative Christian faith, really struggle with the idea that one can be both Christian and gay, that there's compatibility with those things, that there's not,
right.
That's not a contradiction. And I see, as I read in your bio, that you now are part of what is called Common Sanctuary. Can you tell a bit about how you've reconciled your faith and the sacred and the sexual, the faith and the sexuality, how that's come to be for you?
Yeah, that's a huge conversation, and, books and books have been written about it. And there's all kinds of amazing online resources these days for people who are trying to figure out how to reconcile faith and sexuality. For me, it was a number of things. I did all the reading. I did all the kind of parsing of the Greek words. And I came to the conclusion that the Bible does not forbid same-sex relationships as we know them today. I would go so far as to say that the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, really had no concept of a gay orientation. That just wasn't a thing that was talked about or experienced or really understood in antiquity. So that's one of the ways that I can say the Bible itself does not forbid what we know today as loving same-gender relationships. But that's just, that's picky, and that convinces some people and it doesn't convince other people. What I think I finally realized was, even if the Bible forbids same-sex relationships, we know today so much more than the writers of Scripture knew. And that won't convince, conservative Christians who believe every single word and every letter of Scripture to be, handed down by God. But that's the way I've come to understand the Bible. I think the Bible is a record of faithful people interacting with God as best they know how and writing it down. And I would say that the people who wrote down those sexual ethics didn't understand the way we understand sexuality today. They didn't understand a lot of things the way we understand things today. So there's tons of kind of ways to approach sexuality and faith. One of the things I'll say is interesting, and I was thinking about this in relationship to kind of the theme of your podcast, the resilience piece. I was just last week at a conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called the Q Christian Fellowship Conference. And it's the largest gathering of LGBTQ Christians. I've been wanting to go to this conference for a decade. I've known about it, and I've known people online, and it was so exciting for me to finally be there. And I did a couple of workshops, and I sang on the main stage and told a little bit of my story. But one of the things that was most moving to me, as I stood in this room, and I think there were over 600 people that night, and we were singing worship songs just like you would in any evangelical church in America, with arms raised and eyes closed and people singing their hearts out. And I just was struck by the resilience of the people in that room. And I was thinking about how so many conservative Christians would look at us and say, it's not even possible to be a real Christian and living out your authentic gay sexuality. And I thought, how dare they? Look at the survivors in this room. Do you know what it has cost so many of us to be here? We've been told again and again we don't belong at the table, and yet here we are, still pouring out our hearts, still doing our best to connect with the God of the universe that we love and we have experienced. And it was a powerful moment.
Well, and frankly, Matt, a lot of folks in that conflict don't make it out. You were with them, you called them survivors, but not all of those survivors survive.
You're absolutely right.
A lot of those folks have disappeared either to drugs or drink or suicide or any of the things that can befall somebody who's struggling and feeling ashamed. So I'm so touched and thrilled that you found this reconciliation of yourself. And it sounds like you did so with a loving family and a loving community. How are your kids with all this right now?
They're doing great. I was so amazed by, I'm trying to think how to say this. I remember being so grateful and so amazed at how quickly all four of them kind of came to a place of saying, you know what, Dad, we love you. We're proud of you. This doesn't change anything. And I think I have so much gratitude for their mom too, because she and I together created a family, I think, that could withstand this kind of storm, and like I was talking about, the months leading up to my coming out. I think those months were really important too, because it was like, we're going to do this together. We're going to show the world that you can still love each other. We're going to show the world that you can respect each other and you can be a family, even going through a massive change like this. And it was almost like we were all co-conspirators in this, this telling our story the way we wanted to tell it, And I think even to this day, there's been pain. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. And one of the things that I'm really careful about in all my work is to tell the truth, that it's not like all rainbows and unicorns on this side of the closet door. It's just not. It's been difficult financially. It's been difficult emotionally.
Well, a divorce is a difficult thing, period, regardless of the reason.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Especially a divorce from somebody that you love and care for.
Yeah, exactly. It's been difficult. And yet here we are, and we're doing our best to be resilient and to love each other. My kids they're remarkable allies. Honestly, they're very bold on social media and in their relationships, and people that they date, churches that they attend, friends of theirs, kind of all know the story, and it's just like a part of life. This is who we are, and we're not ashamed of it.
Well, that seems to be the theme, doesn't it? It sounds like to me, if I was going to sum up how you made it from there to here, the two words that keep coming up for me are that you set the shame aside, you put that away.
Yeah.
And that it was the love and support of friends, loved ones, community.
Yeah.
That was a big, important part of your process. If you had one last thing to say to somebody, a person of faith who is struggling with this same dilemma, what might you say?
One of the things that continues to be really impactful to me as I think about this whole thing, the Bible has a principle that talks about by their fruits you will know them, and it's kind of like, look at the results, look at the evidence. And I would say non-affirming theology that does not acknowledge or celebrate the diversity of sexual orientation and gender identities that we now know are real. Theology that does not support and celebrate that harms people. And you can see the fruit of that non-affirming theology in suicides, in estrangements, in depression and anxiety, and all kinds of awful things. And the fruit that I can see from celebrating and acknowledging the reality of LGBTQ sexualities and identities is freedom and life and health and peace. And I tell people, Jesus said, I came to bring abundant life. And my question is, where do you see abundant life? Do you see it in trying to suppress and hide, or do you see it in living authentically and joyfully? To me, there's just no comparison. And at the end of the day, that's what I look at, the fruit, the results that come from these kinds of decisions.
Matt, thank you so very much for sharing this story. And I know it's, though you are a sunny personality and an easy person to feel okay about, I know that this can't all be easy. And I know also that there's a lot of resistance to these ideas, and that I'm sure that there are those out there that could be pretty angry about such things and can be less than loving about it. So I'm touched and honored that you would share this story with me today. And I'm so pleased that you had the support that you need to be who you are. I live not far from the church that you now work at, though you and I have never met in person, but I'm planning on seeing what you do. So I'm looking forward to meeting you and to seeing you do that, and to seeing how you support people of all sexualities and sexual identities, and including straight, by the way.
That's right. I tell people we're not a gay church, but we can be gay at church. So everyone is welcome. Everyone.
Good to know. Well, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. And if somebody wanted to go and look up the resource, is it Q Christian Fellowships, and is it Common Sanctuary? What are the things that they could look up if they needed those resources?
Yeah, I would encourage people definitely look up Q Christian Fellowship. My website, mattnightingale.com, has all kinds of links and resources. You can see the TED Talk there. There's all kinds of blog posts. And yes, I'm in the process. Actually, it's not quite formed yet, but I'm creating a nonprofit called Common Sanctuary that's going to create safe, sacred space to explore these identities of faith and sexuality. So I'm excited about that. That'll be launching in the next couple of months.
Wonderful. Well, in addition to those who have these sexuality concerns for themselves, I'm also hoping that parents and loved ones and spouses and siblings of those struggling might also find them and find comfort and information there as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today and being part of the Morning Glory Project.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
When I think about my conversation with Matt Nightingale today, the word that just keeps jumping out into my mind is authenticity. Not just authenticity like telling the truth, speaking the truth, but being one's authentic self. Gosh, I just wonder how much suffering happens because we're either forced to or we think that we must act differently than we are. We have to adapt ourselves to the expectations of others. And I was so touched by the freedom and the joy that came for Matt because of embracing who he is and helping others to do so too. It didn't come cheap. He really had to give up a life that he had built, an inauthentic life that had very authentic and beautiful things in it, including his family. And he had to give up that old notion of what he was to be who he is. I'm going to think about that. I'm wondering in what ways each of us, in small ways or in large, live less than authentically and how much it costs us. Thanks so much for listening to the Morning Glory Project today. I'm pleased to bring this to you and happy that you were here to join me. Until the next time, go out and bloom.